Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm the creator of TheChocolateLife.com. I'm also the moderator of that and these episodes of The Chocolate Life Live. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is the topic of sustainability. How do craft chocolate makers specifically, but how should we be talking about sustainability? And the reason why I'm bringing this up today is because this follows on, I believe, quite naturally with the topic from the last live stream, which was about judging in the 2023 Craft Chocolate Makers competition and issues around labeling. And so I thought it would be a really, really good idea to follow that up with about labeling, because it is an issue that comes up that many people think about when they put together the labels for their chocolate. And also because someone who was watching in the live stream last week, Diane Stein, suggested it as a topic to follow up on. And so, yeah, absolutely, let's go and make that work. Before I launch into today's live stream, I do want to recommend or I do want to remind people that no matter where they're watching, if they're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, please go into the comments and let me know where you are watching from, right? Because I will give you a quick shout out on the Chocolate Life live here. And again, if you have questions or comments about what it is that we're talking about, please go and put them in the comments, and I will get them asked and answered. All right. And so with that, that aside, what I want to do is I want to mention, as I often do, that this is the homepage of TheChocolateLife.com right now. It is live. And what you may not notice here, but it's a feature, is that for every single one of these live streams, I put together an individual post. And that individual post will give you some ideas of what it is that I plan to talk about during the course of the hour, but also will provide links to resources for topics that are brought up or questions or comments that are asked during the course of the hour. And I do want to give a quick shout out to Diane from Irvine, California. I'm assuming it's Zise chocolate. I'm just guessing, rather than Zeiss, Diane. Just want to make sure that's the case. But yeah, thank you very much for suggesting this topic. All right, and with that, let's go jump into today's topic, which is about communicating sustainability. And I'm going to jump right down to a series of points, 5 points that I put in the post that I want to talk about. Okay? And why this is important for me is that sustainability is a word that is used a lot. It's used a lot, right? As is the word transparency, as is the word traceability. And we have a whole range of definitions for what sustainability might mean. And so when we communicate about sustainability, number one, we need to know what we mean when we say the word sustainable or sustainability. We also need to make sure that we understand what it is that our audience or audiences think about the word sustainability, right? And that's important. So in the June 2021 Chocoa conference, I was a part of a panel on the topic of communicating around sustainability in craft chocolate. And one of the people who was in that conference, a woman, worked for the Conference Board, which is a market research firm here in the United States. And they had done some research around the idea of sustainability around the world. And one of the key things that came out of their research is that different people in different parts of the world think about sustainability in very different ways. So at a very, very top level, people in Europe tend to think about sustainability in terms of social justice. So am I treating my farmers well, for example? This tends to be the issue, one of the issues related to the way they think about sustainability. They're also going to think about environmental impact, right? And things like that. Whereas people in the United States, particular, not just North America, but the United States in particular, um, people who think about sustainability tend to think about it in terms of recycling. And the reason why that's important, right, is that if you're here in the United States and you're communicating around issues of social justice, right, or that's what you think, so that's what you think sustainability means, right? Right. American consumers might not connect with that idea. All right. And that's really, really important. You need to understand what your audience thinks about what sustainability means, because if you communicate with them about things they are not interested in, or they're not as interested in, or not sort of central to the way they think about the topic, you're not actually communicating at them, you're communicating past them. So what is sustainability? Now, it turns out that that's not an easy question to answer. So so I did this. So just sort of coincidentally this morning on LinkedIn, there is a woman who works for the UN. She's somehow related to the SDG, the Sustainable Development Guidelines, and she has this post. And though they're offering free sustainability courses from the United Nations. So there's something called My Sustainable Living Challenge, and I don't know who the My is, but sustainable lifestyles. And I would be interested to know if these two things were written in concert with each other. But what is digital sustainability learning path? What does that mean? The circular economy, what does the circular economy have to do with sustainability? What is the 2030 agenda? Resource efficiency indicators for the Sustainable Development Guidelines, the zero net standards. So the net zero standards, excuse me. So what you have here, right, is a recipe for confusion, right? We have a whole lot of terms which are not well explained or explained at all. I don't necessarily know that they are presented in an order that makes sense. I'm looking at this and I'm going, well, maybe what I'd like to do is have, from a UN perspective, have the first sustainability course be the SDG primer, and have people go there and then work their way through a very, very specific order of things so that there's a foundation, so they understand what sustainability is from United Nations perspective, right? And this becomes really, really important. I was at a conference, I was at a trade show in Cologne, Germany in 2018, ISM, and I attended a panel on sustainability. And everybody in the panel, everybody in the room was using this word sustainability. And nobody actually defined what they meant when they used the word sustainability. So I got up, right, during the question and answer program, and I said, what do you mean when you use sustainability? And it turns out that what we might say is there's a vocabulary of sustainability. There's this language that people who are in the sustainability business, right, use with each other and communicate with each other. And there's a whole bunch of assumptions about what it means, so that if you're outside this in-group, right, they know right away that you're not one of them, that you're talking about sustainability in ways that they haven't agreed upon as how we're going to talk about sustainability. So this is one reason. What do we mean when we use the word sustainable or sustainability? And what does it mean from you as the craft chocolate maker? Right? What does sustainability mean to you? What does sustainability mean to you? What does transparency mean to you? What does traceability mean to you? And then what does it mean to be ethical? Right? And these are topics that I've covered on the Chocolate Life Live in the past. Right? And so as a communicator, someone who thinks about this a lot, what I want to do is I want to make the propositions as simple as possible. Right? I want to communicate them in as few words as possible. And sort of like Occam's razor, I want to have as few confounding factors as possible. So I don't want to layer upon a definition. So it's sort of like saying, well, if you are a craft chocolate maker, you have to be ethical and sustainable. Right? This is, if you and I disagree on what ethical and sustainable mean, then we're going to disagree on what craft chocolate is. So do ethical and sustainable deserve to be a part of the definition for craft chocolate? I don't think so, because it just makes the proposition of buying into what craft chocolate is, that much harder. So what you want to do is you want to be as simple and straightforward and understandable as possible. So we can have this broad discussion about what it means to be ethical. But in the end, I think that if what ethical means is that nobody is taking unfair advantage of anyone. So boom, that's my description. When it comes to ethical sourcing, no one is taking unfair advantage of anyone, right? From the farm, right, through the factory, through to the consumer. I mean, it's very simple, very straightforward, and everybody gets it. And so what I want to do is I want to get to that same level of simplicity when it comes to a definition around sustainability. And so for me, right, what does being sustainable mean? I'm going to take a version of the triple bottom line, the people, profit, planet rubric, and cast it in terms of what are called ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues. And we want to focus on 3 pillars, right? So we have environmental sustainability, we have economic sustainability, and we have social sustainability. So what does environmental sustainability mean? I can go to the UN and I can look at their 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I can realize that 13 or 14 or some other number of those sustainable SDGs is somehow related to the environment, fish on land or life on land, life underwater. Right. In the end, environmental sustainability means is that the crop, whatever it is that you're growing, it could be cacao, it could be fish, doesn't matter. Right. Environmental sustainability means that whatever it is that you're growing, right, and the supporting ecosystems, right, and the dependent ecosystems. So if I'm a cacao tree, a supporting ecosystem is going to be the water nearby, for example. That's a supporting ecosystem. And a dependent ecosystem might be pollinators. So very, very simple way to think about it. But the trees and their supporting and dependent ecosystems, right? And by the way, the water supply is also a dependent ecosystem. If I'm doing large scale fermentation, then the juice which runs off is very highly acidic and with a lot of sugar. And if it gets into a local stream, it can alter the biome of the stream. So we need to think about those implications as well. But it means that those 3 things, the crop, the supporting ecosystem, and the dependent ecosystem, are in fact managed in a way that they are going to be healthy and thriving for my grandchildren. Right? So we've just put a generational component, and sometimes I say in 100 years. But the notion is we're doing, whatever we're doing is focused on the notion that we can continue to do what it is that we're doing, right? And do this, right, so that our grandchildren can take over, and they can take over and do it for their grandchildren. For me, that is what sustainability means when it comes to environmental sustainability. Very, very simple. The trees, the cocoa, their supporting and dependent ecosystems are going to be healthy and thriving 100 years from now. Really simple to understand. If we extend that to economic sustainability, then what we can say is that there's enough money in the system. So the farmer not only earns enough from the sale of their cocoa to keep their family fed and clothed and housed and do the things that the family wants to do, but also that there's enough money left over to be able to achieve the environmental sustainability goals. So it means that the farmer has enough resources to be able to spend time in the farm, to be able to prune properly, do other forms of maintenance, to be able to do improvements that are necessary to make sure that the environmental sustainability goals are met. And that's what economic sustainability means from the farmer's perspective, right? And we'll get into this in a 4th aspect of sustainability. But that's what it means from the farmers, the economic sustainability for the farmer and the farming family. The 3rd aspect of that is social sustainability. And what that means is that the farmers exist in communities, and the communities need to be healthy and thriving 100 years from now. And so when we think about the environmental, economic, and social sustainability, when we put them together, it says that we're managing things generationally not just on a quarter by quarter basis. Right? So that's really, 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 I think it's a really straightforward way to think about sustainability. It's very simple. They're concepts which are easy to comprehend, right? And they also are comprehensive in the sense that pretty much, I think 15 or 16 of the 17 UN SDGs, right, fit under this very, very simple model of environmental, economic, and social sustainability, thinking about it generationally. The fourth aspect of sustainability, which doesn't get talked very often about, but I think is equally important for a bunch of reasons, right? And the first one of which is that when most people think about sustainability issues, right, all of the issues are in producing countries. They're all associated with things that go on in the farm or on the farm, or getting the cacao from the farm to the Centro de Copio, or from the farm to the cooperative, and from the cooperative to the port of export. I mean, all of that stuff happens in a producing country, right? And so when we think about sustainability, it's all about where the product is made, grown. In this case, the cocoa is grown. And that we need to think about another aspect. So I add a fourth leg to this sustainability. It's normally a tripod. I'm adding another leg to the stool. And that is what I think of as market sustainability. And so what does market sustainability means? It means that there are people who are willing to pay, right? So, so if I am a buyer of cacao, if I'm a chocolate maker, what I need to make sure is that I am paying enough, right? Farm gate, right? So that the farmer receives what it is that they need to be able to implement, right, the environmental and economic sustainability goals for their farm, right? But there's also enough so that the community in which the farmers live can thrive. And we need to have buyers that can do that. And what that means is that the whole notion of sustainability is not just a producing country problem, it's a consuming country problem, right? That the big chocolate, everybody else who's involved in purchasing cocoa, right, needs to understand that there's a market sustainability issue. And if what they're doing is they're always pushing for the lowest price that they can possibly get, it means that fundamentally it's not sustainable, because there's just not enough money in the system to be able to do everything it is that we need to do ethically without taking unfair advantage, right, of someone along the chain. And usually it's the individual smallholder farmer who has no power, no leverage in the situation. And so they're the ones who end up being taken advantage of. And so if we think about it that way, again, from my perspective, right, this is again a very, very simple, very clean model that we can use and we communicate around easily. It starts with this basic notion of human solidarity. We're not here to take advantage of anyone, right? But we extend that notion of ethical behavior, right, we're not just not taking advantage of people, but we're not taking advantage of the environment that the people, that the trees are grown in. We're not taking advantage of the communities that the farmers live in. There's this core aspect of ethics, right, which has to do with not taking unfair advantage of anyone, which supports, I believe, this entire enterprise. Right. I'm going to jump real quickly. We have David from Colombia. Who asked the question, how to avoid developing a concept of sustainability that appeals too much to people, that it becomes convenient and comfortable. David, what I'm going to say is that I think that things like fair trade, so not fair trade as a concept, but the way fair trade is implemented by, for example, FLO, Fair Trade Licensing Organization, Fair Trade International, Rainforest Alliance, and organizations like that. When we think about sustainability in those terms, right? One of the challenges I think many of us have with that, okay, let me ask. So David did a follow-up to clients, right? Which informs the question. So, but I think that one of the issues is about communication. So And this was part of my Confectionery Live talk last week, where I was speaking with a cocoa producer in Ecuador, a cocoa and chocolate processor in Colombia, and a confectioner in the UK. Is that every person or every entity in this chain, and there were only three actors, three contributors, right, has mutual responsibility to communicate to each other clearly. So if I'm a cocoa producer, I have a responsibility to communicate about my cocoa, how it's produced, where the inputs are, all of these issues, to the person or the company that is going to transform the cocoa beans into a finished product. And then the chocolate maker has a responsibility to go and communicate about what they do, right, to their customers, so the end consumer, right, another client, right. And when we think about it, right, as in broad, right, and think about another underlying principle of what's going on, what we want to do when we communicate around all of these issues of sustainability, right, is to give people confidence that they can rely on what it is that we're talking about, right? So I tend not to write about things that I haven't personally experienced. So if, I'm not going to write about Colombia until I've been to Colombia. I'm not going to write about Brazil until I've been to Brazil, right? I want to be able to talk about things saying, listen, I put my fingers in it. I put my hands in it. I've seen it. I've smelled it. I've done the work, right? I've been there. And this is my experience. Right? So what are some things that we can do? Number one, let's go back to the Rainforest Alliance and FLO point that I was trying to make, is that what people are looking for is they're looking for easy answers. So looking at a frog or finding the FLO, the Fair Trade logo on a package means that, oh, I don't have to think anymore, right? Because some organization has done this work for me. And what I'm going to do is I am going to trust that organization. I'm going to say I am confident that what this organization is telling me is true. Right? The challenge with that, right? The challenge with that model is that if you buy fair trade cocoa, right, and you've never been to the cooperative or you've never been to the country where that fair trade cocoa is produced, right, you don't have any personal understanding of what actually goes on. So you as a buyer are abdicating your responsibility to a third-party organization, and you're trusting them, right, to be, number one, transparent, right? And transparency has to do with being completely, right? So telling the story. So they're telling you all parts of the story, not just the parts of the story that they want you to hear, right? They're doing it accurately, right? And they're doing it in a concise way. Right. So these are really important aspects of the question that you asked, David, which is you, number one, realize that your number one job is to be able to communicate confidently to your customers, right? And you can only get that if you have taken personal responsibility. Right. All right. You can't abdicate your responsibility to some third party over which you have no control. Right. So if you're buying fair trade cocoa, right, you can, if you want to, rely on what the FLO reports are. Right. But ask yourself this question, especially if you're buying fair trade cocoa out of West Africa. Right. Right. Is mass balance involved? So I've done a deep dive into mass balance. It's one of the Chocolate Life Live episodes. I can link to it afterwards. But if you don't know what mass balance is, you need to know what mass balance is, and you need to know that the cocoa you're purchasing, if the cocoa you're purchasing, fair trade cocoa, is in fact subject to mass balance, which is a way of obfuscating the origin of the cocoa. I mean, you could produce a bar that is labeled fair trade chocolate that actually has no or almost no fair trade certified cocoa in the bar, which doesn't seem right to me. It doesn't seem ethical, right? I'm taking unfair advantage of what it is that the consumer doesn't know and doesn't know to ask, right, in order to be able to be able to present an opinion that I have or an image that I'm looking to present, right? So that's really important. So again, getting back to this notion of confidence, right? This is what I believe people are looking for, right? People might talk about trust. That's another way of thinking about it. I like confidence. I don't like the word authentic when we talk about this because it seems like advertising speak, and there's a sort of aura of made upness about it. I prefer the word genuine, right? You want to be able to talk to people and in your own language say, this is what I know from my own experience, right? And you need to be very clear to say, listen, I purchased from a source, right? And they tell me X and Y and Z, right? But I have personally haven't gone and visited the farms. I haven't gone and visited the origin, right? So it's being clear, right? And complete and accurate in terms of the image that you are presenting. And part of it also is to be able to present the information in a way that people can feel good about. I mean, they have to accept the language that you're using, the way you're telling the story, the way you've perhaps integrated some of these ideas into what you're doing, right? And how does this end up in packaging, right? So, ethically sourced. Well, just putting ethically sourced on a package, right? As someone who knows a lot about what it is that goes on, for me, that doesn't mean anything. I don't know what ethically sourced is because, hey, you as a maker haven't told me what you mean when you say ethically sourced. I mean, you could say no child labor involved, but that certainly is an aspect of something that could be ethically sourced, but it is not everything that ethics might cover in this. When you talk about sustainably produced, what does that mean about sustainably produced? I mean, these are really hard topics to get across on the limited real estate that is on a label, but it needs to be part of whatever it is that you're talking about on their website and integrated into all aspects of brand communication in a way that makes sense. And in my personal belief, the number one thing we all need to do is give people a sense of confidence that you know what you're talking about, that they can rely on the representations that you're making, right? And if you can do that, then people are going to go and have trust in your brand and in the chocolate, and they will bring that trust to the chocolate. And importantly, what they will do is they will share that trust with their friends, right? And so they will be able to act as good advocates for the brand because what they've done is they'll be able to represent that level of trust to other potential customers. Right? So really, really important. Want to say, hey, Lynn, thanks for connecting in from Panama. Hope that everything is going on for you down there, that's going on well. And Diane asked the question, it still needs to be easy for the consumer to choose the bar or chocolate brands that are sustainable and ethical, right? Let's put that back up. Okay, number one, okay? Tell me what you mean by sustainable and ethical, right? So at the moment, right, that message is driven by large marketing budgets. So many people consider Tony's Chocolonely to be ethically produced, right, because of marketing around trying to eliminate illegal child labor and slavery in their cocoa supply chain in West Africa, right? But is that the only aspect of ethics that Tony's needs to talk about? The answer is, in my opinion, no, right? While their cacao supply chain might be independent, right, and they can verify some things. So, for example, much of what they do is all their cocoa is fair trade certified. So they rely on FLO audits and certification for some aspects of their communication around what ethical and sustainable means. As a company, one of the things that I can say about Tony's that I agree with is they've said, we do not allow mass balance in our supply chain. So we're not blending cocoa where we don't, we're not taking cocoa from 5 or 6 different places and mixing it together, some of which may be fair trade certified, some of which may not. They've said we don't allow that, right? But it turns out that the cocoa butter is manufactured for them by Barry Callebaut in a plant in the Ivory Coast. And then the cocoa beans and the cocoa butter get transported to Visa in Belgium, where the finished chocolate is produced by Barry Callebaut. And so is it ethical to say we have no children? So can we completely segregate the illegal labor in our cacao supply chain, right, from the illegal labor that is most likely present in Barry Callebaut's supply chain? Is it ethical to do that? So if, for example, if I'm not being 100% transparent and 100% clear, right, about the manufacturing relationship that I have with Barry Callebaut, Tony's has with Barry Callebaut, am I as a brand, is Tony's as a brand, being completely upfront, right, and communicating with all of their customers in a way that should give them confidence? Now, whatever it is that they're doing extremely well. I mean, they're doing over 100 million in sales a year. They're the dominant chocolate brand in the Netherlands. I mean, they're a single image marketing or single issue marketing company. They have done as good a job at that as anyone else, right? But I think that they have achieved the success that they have achieved, number one, because of the relationship they have with Barry Callebaut, which I don't think they're being 100% upfront with, right? And because they're not communicating clearly about what the impact they're actually having on the ground. They're being very selective about the way they communicate. And I've done a breakdown of the Tony's transparency reports. So there's 2 live streams, one of which is on deconstructing transparency reports, and the other one is on constructing transparency reports. Did them back to back, in which I go through and look at what it is that Tony says. And there's a lot there to go question and wonder about in terms of what they're doing. So Diane, I don't know that it needs to be easy for the consumer, right? And because these are very, very complicated, very, very complex and very, very nuanced issues, right? So if you have an opportunity to get in front of someone, right? And so you are in a one-to-one situation at a farmer market, or you're in a one-to-one situation at a festival like that, you have the ability to talk with people and let them know, right? And I think that, and I've said before, I think that one of the challenges the craft chocolate market has, the small maker, is that we do not speak with one voice. We don't have an agreed upon definition for what craft is. We don't have an agreed upon definition of what bean to bar or tree to bar is. We don't speak with one voice. And if we were able to speak with one voice, that we could cut through a lot of the confusion. If we're confused as makers, then it's no wonder that consumers are confused about this. And if we can get together and talk about it, then I think it would be much, much easier for companies like yours, Diane, to be able to make it easier for consumers to make choices based on sustainability and ethics claims, right? But we're a long way from there at the time being, unfortunately. Want to do a quick shout out to Mark and Yuri in Denver. Hey guys, glad to hear you. Glad to see you're here today. Diane, I am an advocate finding the soundbite we can use to convince consumer to spend more for chocolate. That is whatever we're going to use for the word sustainable. And Diane, I think that we're in agreement there. What we need to do is we need to find a way to communicate concisely what it is that we mean. We need to communicate. The fact is that chocolate, right? And most people, it's actually chocolate candy, right? That people are thinking about. When most people think about chocolate, they're thinking about candy bars. They're not thinking about chocolate per se, right? And why are we thinking about just the ethics of cocoa production? Why aren't we thinking about the ethics of sugar production, right? Which in big chocolate is at least as big a problem. In many cases, as is the cocoa sourcing that's going on. For some reason, we focus on chocolate because people have an emotional connection with chocolate that they don't have with cocoa, right? But in the end, right, it's all talking about people living, the farmers being able to lead dignified lives, right? That they're not in a position of poverty where they don't have choices, right? And the reason why chocolate needs to cost more is because we need to be able to pay the farmers equitably for their labor, for their lives and livelihoods. And I think personally, that is something that I respond to. But I know that I don't necessarily respond to it in every aspect of my life. I'm much more open to that understanding when it comes to chocolate. But there are some things that I go into a store and, listen, if I have two different brands and one's on sale, I haven't done the same amount of research for other foods that I've done for chocolate. I'm aware of it, but I have limited dollars and I need to figure out how I spend them. So, this is the challenge that we face. I mean, I need to decide where I'm going to spend that money, right? And what it is that I'm going to support. So absolutely. But here's the important part I think I want to make about that is that there is no one single soundbite. What you need to do is you need to listen to the customer about what it is that they are interested in, and then respond to them using the language that they want to hear. Right. So often we've talked about quality here. I mean, there have been ChocolateLife episodes around quality, and in the end, there's no absolute definition for quality: good quality, bad quality. Right? Quality is in the wallet of the buyer. The buyer will tell you what quality is based on their willingness to pay. Right? Every single one of us has a basket of attributes that defines what quality is. Right? And so for some people, the primary criterion might be it's cheap. Right? And if somebody is solely focused on, well, this is too expensive, I don't know how you communicate with them about that. For some people, it's, oh, this reminds me of what I used to eat when I was a kid, right? And, again, you're going to have difficulty if your product doesn't remind them of the chocolate that they ate when they were a kid. But then there are a whole bunch of other issues that come in that come into this. So I think that the number one way we deal with the issue is to listen to whoever it is coming out to us and respond to them using the language that we think they might be most receptive to, right? So not one soundbite. We need to have multiple ways of talking about the same issues using different language aimed at different constituencies. So I will say that. David, important for overall sustainability to achieve a leveling in power relations. Oh, wow. Fundamentally, David, we are in the position right now, right? Because of an abnormal concentration of power. There are fewer than 10 companies in the world that control, 90% of cocoa and 90% of chocolate, right? And we have 4 governments that are responsible for producing 80% of all the cocoa in the world. There is an enormous amount of consolidation of power, and there are millions of jobs and millions of livelihoods outside of consuming countries, or outside of producing countries, in consuming countries that are dependent upon these companies. And they're going to do everything they possibly can in order to be able to maintain their status quo. People outside always hear from farmers through a third party that has power over farmers. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's very, very true. As a matter of fact, there was a recent post on Twitter having to do with maybe ICI, so the International Cocoa Initiative. They're having a panel, and the panel is in some European country, and there's nobody on the panel who is in fact a farmer. And you're right, even if there were a farmer there, the communication with the farmer would be mediated and moderated by someone else, and we don't have a chance to speak with farmers directly, which is why you, as a chocolate maker, if you have never been to the farms you're sourcing from, you can't speak responsibly about what you're doing. You need to go there, you need to see what they're doing, you need to be able to say, this is Jose, or this is Fernando, or this is, Fernanda, whoever the farmer is, all right, Yasmina, whoever they are. You need to be able to speak responsibly from your own personal experience about what it is that goes on. There's another aspect of things, David, that I think is really important, and I think is part of a way to think about solving this problem, is that right now we have very, very limited models of organization. when it comes to the way cacao is grown and sold and distributed. So there's the individual smallholder farmer, right, on their own. There is the cooperative, which is a collection of smallholder farmers. And then there are estate holders, right, who employ labor. Now, I don't want to say anything bad about estate holders, because I personally believe that, if I'm a farmer and I don't want to have the responsibility for managing my own farm, I would prefer to be an employee. That should be an option that's open to me. So I'm not going to make that decision. But I think that we go from an individual smallholder farmer to a cooperative of hundreds or thousands, right, to one small entity, a corporate entity that hires labor. What is really important to understand is, I think that non-governmental organizations, and this includes aid organizations, I extend this up to aid organizations, USAID, in what they supported in Peru and other places like that, have this romantic notion that what it is necessary to do is to keep the smallholder farmer as an individual smallholder farmer on the individual smallholder farm, therefore depriving them of any leverage in the relationships. And so by doing so, right, we are maintaining the status quo. So the NGOs are in fact engaging in a form of socially acceptable economic imperialism with a focus on keeping the smallholder farmer on the smallholder farm. Right? So I personally believe, and I know that in Colombia, David, the notion of the word federation has a particular meaning, and we can't use it that way. But is there another level of organization that between 1 and 100 or 1,000, right, that we can get to, that would enable farmers to be able to share resources and to be able to grow enough cocoa to be able to have some leverage in the economic negotiations that are going on? So, but in the end, absolutely, David, it is an imbalance of power that maintains the status quo. And this is why, for example, I think it's really important to be able to go and be able to to be able to go and visit with your farmers and understand, what their farms are like and what they're going through, and to be able to figure out what's going on, and to be able to communicate about them from your own experience. There's nothing like being able to communicate from your own experience. I was there. This is what I saw, right? That will give people a sense that, oh yeah, you know what you're talking about. And so when I was, I started writing about chocolate in 2001, but I started researching chocolate in 1994, thereabouts. My first trip to a cacao farm, to a producing country, wasn't until 2003. And I felt like a fraud until I had visited my first farm. Because up until that point, everything that I knew about cocoa and chocolate was from somebody else's experience. And it wasn't until I had a chance to go see and smell and taste and walk and walk and walk and get rained on, right, over the course of some very long days, that I said, I have an idea, and a very, very small idea, right, of what it means to be a cocoa farmer. And so, right, go and visit your farmers. Without the issue being addressed, sustainability is mostly happening just in paper. Absolutely. I believe that a lot of communication around sustainability is greenwashing, that people are selectively telling stories, right, that benefit their position. And if they actually communicated the complete story in a way that was simple to understand, not in a 220-page annual report called a FAIR report, in which all the important numbers are, don't start until page 200, that's a good sign that something is being hidden. So I agree with you that this imbalance of power is something that needs to be addressed. And I don't know if you know about this, David, but there's in fact an organization called the Federation of Cocoa Commerce, right? And I think that like 100% of all the cocoa that comes out of West Africa has to be handled on FCC terms, and in order to be a member, which is registered in London, right? And so there are these entities that most people don't know about, right, which have a place in maintaining the current imbalance of power and maintaining the status quo, which is to the detriment of farmers. So we need to figure out that. So convince bigger chocolate makers that they should change their corporate practices. So Diane, I don't disagree with you here, but this is really hard. And here's why it is really hard, is that the vast majority of very large chocolate companies are in fact publicly traded, right? And if you're publicly traded, you have a fiduciary responsibility, right, to maximize return to your shareholders, right? And what that means is you need to make sure that the cost of your inputs, right, in this case for chocolate candy, cocoa and sugar, are as low as they could possibly be, right? So it would be really, really difficult to convince investors in a public company to be able to say, you know what, that steady return that you're used to getting over the last couple of years, you need to take a haircut, because what we're doing is we're going to double the price we're paying for cocoa. It's going to be really hard to do that. So it needs to start with, we had this notion, which as part of the sustainability movement, we might say, rather than extractive agriculture, which is let's just take everything we can and not return anything, to regenerative agriculture, right? Which is something that is increasingly becoming present in the awareness of more people. Regenerative agriculture. What does regenerative cocoa farming mean, right? Then we have this notion, we can expand that notion into extractive economics, which is where almost all of this is, to regenerative economics. And when we think about economic sustainability, ooh, this is regenerative economics. There's enough money in the system that we can think about things for 100 years from now. When it's not a democratic issue, it's not a Republican issue, it's not a political issue, it's a human issue, right? But we need to move away from extractive economics and extractive agriculture into regenerative agriculture and regenerative economics. And the problem is so perverse that even if I'm a private company, if I'm Mars, for example, right? If I want to be competitive in the marketplace, which means I want to be able to sell products which are price competitive, right, with publicly traded companies, I need to engage in the same business practices that these other companies do. Like if they're paying, X per kilo for cocoa, I can't afford to pay 2X per kilo for cocoa because I'm not going to be able to sell a product which is price competitive, and so people are going to go elsewhere. So it's really, really important to understand that we don't need to convince bigger chocolate makers that they should change their corporate practice. We need to change our attitudes towards investment in those companies and what the purpose of those companies is. If the purpose of a company is to maximize shareholder return, then it's going to be a problem, right? But if we can, so this is one of the reasons why, for example, B Corp certification as opposed to C Corp certification comes into play, because the boards of directors and investors will know that, that the primary responsibility of the organization is not necessarily returning what's going on. So just an interesting thought there. I don't disagree with you, but I think it's a much larger problems. Okay, so Teresa, as a customer, I don't really buy it at face value that a company is sustainable. I find this an overused subjective terms that has been hijacked to confuse and convince consumers of things that may or may not be true. I'd rather have a brand express their values by stating what they are doing, what they strive for, and how they are working towards their goals. A blanket statement of sustainability just doesn't jive with me. And I think that, I think that's exactly right. So when I say, for you as a company, for you as an individual, what does ethics mean? Right. So when I use the word ethical in a sentence, ethical is shorthand for what? For me, it means I'm not taking unfair advantage of anybody in the supply chain. Wait, when I say sustainability, this is what I mean. I'm talking about generational, attitudes. I'm talking about regenerative agriculture, regenerative economics. I'm talking about making sure that sustainability is something that can be supported over to my children, to my grandchildren, to my great-grandchildren and beyond. I think that we need to think about sustainability that way, not just as a term which gets us more quarterly returns. It's this, next quarter returns on the shareholder report that is, I think, is part of the challenge that we faced, right? So I think you're absolutely right. When somebody says sustainability, I don't know what they mean. When somebody says ethics, I don't know what they mean, because they don't explain those things. usually either on the packaging or on the website that gives me any confidence that I understand what that actually means in practice, right? And this is where this confidence comes in. When we talk about transparency, right, what I think of is visibility rather than the word transparency, right? Visibility. It means that I am telling you the entire story. For me, that's what it's about. I'm telling you the entire story. I'm not covering up the bad, right? I'm only telling you the good, and I'm spending 6 months figuring out how to write about the good in order to be able to convince you that I'm doing good. Transparency is about telling the whole story, warts and all. If you want to be transparent, it means you got to say, this is where we failed this year. This is where we didn't live up to expectations. We invested, David, we could talk about a company whose name I won't mention, but we invested an enormous amount of money in Colombia on a particular kind of product, and it failed, right? Be open about it, and then say, oh yeah, we failed, but it had an impact upon the communities that we engaged in this project, and we don't think we did a good enough job in recovering from our failure. I think this is really, really, really important to think about when we think about transparency. It's about communicating the entire story, even if aspects of the story, right, are ones that are not necessarily are necessarily in your favor, right? None of this is perfect. We all make mistakes. All we can do is strive to be our best and do our best on a daily basis, and to improve the business forward. And I have said in the past, I will say it again, if we're not making mistakes, we're not trying hard enough, right? The challenge is to be able to own up to the mistakes, do the work necessary to figure out what you're doing, and then strive to improve. Right? So that's that. Traceability, I think, is also a part of confidence. I want to get through the notes on this list. Traceability is really about documenting chain of custody. Right? You want to have confidence that you know who the farmer was. You want to have confidence that when it went from point A to point B, you know that what was sent from point A was received by point B, right? You want to know, again, traceability, if there was a monetary transaction, that the agreed upon amount of money was actually received by the selling party. And you want to be able to do that all the way from the farm through to at least the factory, right? And ideally, what you can do is you can trace it through the factory. Manufacturing tracing is a challenge, but that when it comes out on the other side, you can trace it from the distributor to the end consumer. Again, as part of the confidence. I know as a consumer, or I can find out, I can have confidence in that the representations that are being made, right, about how the cocoa gets from point A to me, right, from origin to me, is one that I can rely upon, and that's that in terms of the main concepts what's going on. So there is somebody who's been pointing into the comments, posting into the comments. So he's got a project which is called DRM, right, which is do right and more, to solve part of the issue, right? Starting in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months. All right, so there's a whole lot of other stuff in here. I'm not going to go share the comments because I'm going to do my due diligence. What I'm going to do is I'm going to contact David directly. I'm going to have a conversation with him about what it is that he's doing, which is of interest for me, because one of the things you may know from this is that I've been working since the early days of the pandemic on a supply chain software platform, a chain of custody platform, which has got some really, really interesting components to it. It's called Connected, and we're in the process of finishing up a first alpha release that we can get in the hands of people to test. And so perhaps some of the things that David is doing might fit at a platform level into what we're doing. So David had a sign off, but what I am going to do is I'm going to get in touch with him to figure this out. So he's proposing an artificial intelligence solution. He has some other concerns about engaging face-to-face. Things are going to fail. So this is intriguing. As I say, I will follow up with David, and I will get back to everybody with that. So before I go, there are a couple of things that I do want to point out. First one of which is people may know that here on the Chocolate Life we've been talking about the issue related to heavy metals contamination, specifically cadmium lead in cocoa and chocolate, as a result of an article from Consumer Reports magazine, which was published in mid-December. People may know that there's a contributor to the Chocolate Life. His name is Keith Ayub. He's a clinical researcher emeritus on the faculty at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine here in New York City. And he has written 2 previous articles. He's also been a guest on 2 live streams about the topic of heavy metals contamination. And he wrote a post for me talking about the issue of cadmium lead, specifically related to the Consumer Reports article. And it's a point-by-point dissection of the entire controversy. Again, our goal here is to help you feel confident about talking about the actual risks associated with heavy metals contamination, cadmium, lead, maybe sometimes arsenic, depending on where you're coming from. But how do you talk about these risks specifically when you talk to people? Really, really important to understand. And if you read this post, you will have a really, really good understanding of what the issues are, how they are presented by Consumer Reports, what some of the science says that suggests that the information was not communicated completely or clearly, right? That there might be an agenda behind it, which is not obvious if you're not careful. So please, everybody, go take a look at that. Now, if anybody would like, I don't know that I need to do a live stream on this. I think there's enough information on there, but I'd be happy to be able to talk about a live stream if people are interested in it, just to take feedback and questions. But, right, if you want to, please, you can go to the Chocolate Life. You can click on join, right? You can become a member. There's a free membership tier. If you can't afford another membership tier, there's no pressure to do so. But once you have become a member, you have the ability to be able to add comments. So I am not currently logged in over here, so I can't comment on this. But once you are a member, you do get to comment. So you can ask questions. You don't have to do it just here on the live stream. You can ask the question on the website. And every single comment comes to my attention, and I try to respond to all of them very, very quickly. So just really, really quick, just wanted to let people know about that post. It's live on the Chocolate Life right now. So if you go to the Chocolate Life, this post is here on the front page. Please share it with your friends. Please share it with customers, people who might have issues about cadmium and lead and misunderstand what it is that Consumer Reports were talking about. Next to last, we have a bit of sad news this week. The gentleman who invented the Peep, that marshmallow treat that I'm not sure we love, but is certainly a part of our history. Marshmallow Peeps, the inventor of the Peep, recently passed away. So just a quick bit of confectionery news, right, that I learned this morning. This was in one of my feeds. I do have a bunch of industry feeds that I do keep on track of for news. And then finally, I'm not a big TikToker, but I do have a TikTok account. People can go there. It's Discover Chocolate or Discover Choc, which is also my Twitter handle and my Instagram handle. I've got a bunch of sort of ASMR recordings of places that I've been traveling. This one on the left is from Brazil. This one on the right is also from Brazil, but I've got them from different countries, and I'm going to be posting these sort of immersive recordings so you can be there in the place and hear the sounds of places that I have been. And so I'm hoping that's something that you all find interesting. You can go there and you can follow me on TikTok. And with that, we're at the hour, almost exactly. If somebody is here, has a final comment or question, that they would like to ask, then please do so. I'm happy to spend a few more moments in here, but otherwise, I will be back this coming Friday at noon Eastern time. Will be the topic for this Friday's live stream has not been set yet. I am not entirely certain what it's going to be. I'm sort of waiting for input. Does anybody want me to talk about cadmium and lead for the Friday's live stream? Can I get Keith here in doing that? But I also want to say that a week from today, so Tuesday, the 7th of February at 12 o'clock Eastern, we are going to, my guest is going to be Dustin Cornett. Dustin is the owner of Chocolate Inn. He's also the organizer of the 2023 Craft Chocolate Challenge. And we are going to be announcing the winners of the 2023 Craft Chocolate Challenge at next Tuesday's live stream. And we hope to be able to have some of the entrants who are in fact winners joining us during the live stream. So I hope that everybody can join us then and support all of the people who've been a part of the Craft Chocolate Challenge, not only the entrants, but Dustin, the organizer, those of us who have been judges. And let me know, please. This is something I'm going to ask. I've been talking with Dustin about the idea of doing an online tasting, a virtual tasting of the winners of the challenge. So there would be a box, I believe, of 9 different chocolates. So the gold, silver, and bronze in each of the categories. I need to figure out how many that is, and that we would arrange to send you this box of chocolates, right? So that you can have all of the winners. And then what we would do is go through and do a tasting. So you'll get an idea of what the judges were thinking of, or what I was thinking of and what Dustin was thinking of, but we can't get other judges on the live stream. But you can give an idea of what we were thinking of as we were going through the judging process and why, right, these particular pieces won what it is that they do. So if that interests you, let us know, send a comment somewhere, email me, and we will get on to that, and we will schedule something for perhaps late in the month of February or sometime in the month of March to have that tasting. I think it'd be a real cool idea, and so I'm looking forward to doing that. And with that, I want to say thank you, everybody who watched through all the way to the end. Right, it's always a pleasure and a privilege to be able to spend part of my day with you, no matter where you're watching, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, whether you're watching live, whether you're following up. Thank you very much for being here. And I want to end as I always do, which is if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Cheers, everyone. Ciao until next time.